Morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's afternoon for me. I know we've got people probably joining from a lot of different places, and it's really wonderful to see so many people already joining us. As we get started, I'd really love to invite everyone who's here, if you can introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're joining from today, and what field you work in, if you're comfortable with that as well. Love to get a sense of who's here. We've got folks joining from Ethiopia, Ghana. For me, I'm joining from Kenya, from Accra, Kenya. Cool, Togo, lots of different places, Senegal. All right. Ottawa, my home country. Cool, really interested in tech in Africa. I think you've come to the right place. Fabulous. Nigeria. Really cool to see so many people coming in from different places. Welcome to all of you. It's so wonderful to have you here. Of all the places that you could be spending your time today, we're so glad and privileged that you've chosen to spend it here with us. So welcome. So we are gonna dive in then. Before we get into the real meat, the good stuff, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping things. This is a really interactive session, so please, I hope you've come ready to share and engage with us. Just in terms of some things that will make the session feel a bit smoother. During the plenary presentations, please do keep your mics and videos turned off just for bandwidth, and also to make sure that everyone can hear the speakers clearly when they're speaking. So please keep your mics and videos off during the presentations. We will have a lot of really great interactive moments throughout the presentation, or sorry, throughout the 2-hour session. So during those moments when we're asking for your thoughts, please participate. Put your ideas in the chat, share your experiences, share your questions. And when we do open it up for discussion, if you want to come off of mute, please do that. If you want to turn your video on while you're speaking, please do that. Or if you prefer to speak in the chat box, take advantage of that. We really want to make sure that folks have different ways of interacting in the way that makes them feel most comfortable. So when we have those interactive moments, we really want to hear from you. Please don't be shy today. And finally, so we know we've got people coming from all over the continent, and we want to be very inclusive. We don't have live interpretation today. The session will be conducted in English, but we do have people in the chat who are going to be helping us translate what's going on in the chat in English or in French. So if you're seeing things coming through in English and you're really wanting to see what it is in French, if that's your preferred language, we'll have folks from the UX team helping out with that. And similarly, translating from French into English in the chat as well. So hopefully you can feel free to engage in your preferred voice. And if you are coming off of mute and speaking during the discussion and you'd prefer to speak in French, we'll have someone there who can maybe just follow up and give us a quick translation summary. So those are some of the prep things so that hopefully this whole session goes really, really smoothly for you. And now we can really dive in. I'm so pleased to introduce our group of speakers today. We have such a wonderful group that the UX design team has brought together. Quickly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Liz McNeil. I know it says Liz Royea. I use 2 last names. And I work as the senior community manager at the HCD Exchange, and that's a project that's dedicated to exploring how human-centered design, or HCD, can be used within public health programming to improve health outcomes across Asia and Africa. And I'm very honored to have been asked by the UX team to moderate today's session. I've been living in different parts of East Africa for the past 10 years, which has been a really wonderful privilege and opportunity. And now I live just outside of Nairobi in Kenya, in the countryside outside of the big city. And I've worked in social enterprise and nonprofits, and I've mainly had a focus on sexual reproductive health up until this point. And I joined the HCD exchange team 3 years ago, almost to the day. And I support and lead our community engagement through events and partnerships and learning exchange, and through providing HCD design support. So now I'd like to pass it over to Wanja, who will introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. My name is Wanja Gitao. I work with Think Place Kenya, leading one of our business units that's focused on capacity building. And that's why this State of HCD in Africa piece was really exciting for me. I have 6+ years of experience applying human-centered design to solve complex challenges in global health, financial inclusion, nutrition, and economic empowerment. I have worked on a number of projects across sectors in about 8 countries in East, South, and West African countries, and I'll be leading one of the sessions today, so really glad to be here. I'll pass it on to my fellow panelist, Munya.
Thank you so much, Wanja. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Munya Joel Chinguwa, and I'm the senior HCD designer at HCD Exchange. And as a designer, I've worked mostly in Southern Africa and recently in East Africa, working in the fields of SME business growth, HIV, AY, SRH, nutrition, and digital adoption. At HCD Exchange, which is where I'm from, right, where I'm working currently, I am the senior HCD designer, and I lead and manage all design-related activities within the organization, but also with our partners that we work with across the globe, but mainly in the global south. And I would like to pass it over to Rajay.
Thanks, Munya. Hi, everyone. My name is Rajay, and I'm a senior UX researcher at UX, and I'm based in Nairobi. I was also one of the co-leads for the State of HCD in Africa study, along with my colleague Oluchi. And as a design and UX researcher, I've worked on and led health, education, and digitization projects in East Africa, a little bit in Southern Africa as well over the last 4 years. I'm also the education vertical lead at UX, and I'm responsible for organizing content, knowledge sharing, and running trainings around education and design at UX. Yeah, over to my co-lead, Oluchi.
Thank you, Rajay. Hello, everyone. My name is Oluchi Audu. I'm a UX researcher at UX, as well as one of the colleagues alongside Rajay for the State of HCD in Africa study. At UX, I typically work on HCD initiatives within the development world. So I've worked on projects within the gender and health sectors, as well as on SBC initiatives, specifically in Nigeria. I also work as a trainer within the UX Academy, where we provide capacity building and professional training for UX designers and researchers within the African context. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'm really, really excited to start this session. I'll now pass it back to Liz.
Thank you so much. And a huge, huge welcome to all of our speakers. Thank you so much to the UX team for hosting this live exchange, and to all the speakers for joining us today. It's going to be a really interesting and rich session because we've got you here. So welcome to all of you. Before we dive in, I'm going to just quickly walk us through the flow of the session so that you know what to expect over the next almost 2 hours. So we'll start with the UX team sharing more about the State of HCD in Africa study to really set the scene and really help us to understand, what was this all about? What was the purpose? And what is it that came out of it that we really need to dig into more? And then they'll pass it over to Munya, who's going to be our first discussant on one big key theme that emerged from this study. And that theme is on capacity building in HCD. We're going to break after we hear some overview and thoughts from Munya and his experience. We'll break into some interactive activities and discussion, and then we'll pass it over to Wanja to take us through the second key theme, which is enabling a locally driven process within HCD initiatives. We'll follow up Wanja's section on with some more interaction and some more discussion and engagement. And if at any point during any of these sections and any of this content, you have any questions coming up, please feel free to put those into the chat, because during this discussion time, we'll also have great opportunity for people to have their questions answered. So feel free to throw those in the chat box at any time as they come into your head, and we'll be collecting them and we can address them during those discussion moments. That will take us really to the end of this session, and I'll pass it back to the UX team, to Oluchi, to really share what comes next for the State of HCD in Africa research and work, and how we can keep that learning going and how you can all be a part of it. So now to kick us off, I will pass it over to Rajay to introduce the study.
Cool. Thanks so much, Liz. So before getting into the study itself and why we chose to run it, we thought it would be useful to just first talk a little bit about what do we mean by human-centered design, or HCD, especially for those in the webinar that might be slightly new to this term, though we know that most of you probably are. And so human-centered design is a problem-solving process that puts users at the center of the design and development process. And at UX, it's not just a process, but it's also a philosophy that guides us towards creating products and services that truly resonate with people's needs, environments, and cultural contexts. It cuts through diverse sectors and industries like health, tech, education, the environment, and it thrives on the inclusion of multidisciplinary teams to address complex problems together. And three key characteristics that define HCD for us. Firstly, the exploratory nature that delves deep into understanding our users and their needs, engaging stakeholders right from the beginning throughout the design process to ensure that we're on track and that we include all the voices throughout the process. And adopting a holistic systems approach to comprehend the various factors influencing the problem at hand. So conducting HCD involves a number of different stages, like research, ideation, prototyping, and we've seen how different organizations have also started adapting the process, renaming some of the stages to make it more appropriate to their context as well, incorporating different activities within them. And though we'll not go too deep into this, we do have plenty of resources to share around these different stages. And if you're looking to learn more about this, do let us know and we're happy to share more resources. Next slide, please. So why did we choose to run this study? For those of you who know about UX and some of the studies that we've run in the past, you'll probably be familiar with the State of UX Research in Africa study. We've had it running for 2 years in a row, and we're set to release the 2023 edition soon. And our colleague Sasha on this chat and her team are working really, really hard to make this the best edition yet for you. So for this particular study on the state of UX research, we observed that the participants and audience of the study were coming mainly from tech companies and startups, mostly from the private sector. And, you know, with many of us at UX working on HCD projects in the development world, we also wanted to explore what HCD looks like here. We've had many observations and experiences and reflections around some of the challenges and what the potential is, what's working well around HCD for us, though we wanted to use the study as a way to get data from a large number of people that might shed light on and explain some of the observations and reflections that we've been having. So, you know, at UX, we really recognize the advantages of HCD, but we're also mindful to its limitations. I'm sure for some of you that are keeping track of on HCD, you're probably seeing many articles coming out on LinkedIn and other platforms around potential criticisms of the methodology or limitations of the methodology. And, we really wanted to understand what this looks like in the African context. We've also seen that, many of the time, knowledge around HCD are, siloed in different organizations. And, HCD Exchange is also one of the big players addressing that as well. But we really wanted to address this across the continent by running a quantitative study. So just a little bit around some of the limitations that came out is that we saw that many of the participants in the study came from organizations implementing HCD projects in Africa. There were fewer respondents that came from the freelance perspective, and so some of these experiences are more representative to those working in these organizations. We also had fewer responses from Central, North, and Southern Africa, and so our data is more representative of Western and Eastern Africa. And these are of course, things that we would want to address in the next study through increased partnerships in these locations. And this was the first year publishing this report. So of course, we're really keen to hear from you all, like what did you really appreciate about the study? What did you feel could have been improved, or what did you feel that was missing? And so please do share that with us throughout this webinar and the upcoming engagements that we'll be having. Next slide, please. I'll just quickly touch on the themes that we explored during the study. We wanted to look at who is doing HCD, so the backgrounds and profiles of those working on the continent, where they're from, what their education background looks like, the level of seniority as well. And then also, where is HCD being done, both in terms of sector, but also geographically. And then how is HCD being done? What tools do they use? How do they work with the methodology? How do they measure impact? And then also the challenges and constraints. What are some of the barriers and challenges that practitioners are facing, either from the design agency perspective or the organization perspective, when they're trying to bring in HCD practices and implement HCD approaches and solutions on the continent? And then also, what are the needs for capacity development on the continent in terms of, the skills, formal training, and what does the career trajectory look like? Of course, we recognize that it probably looks quite different, and the skills needed to be a successful HCD practitioner on the continent, or even in different parts of the continent, could be quite different to those outside. And then finally, get the participants' perspective on what should the future of HCD look like, to continuously promote the field and make it more context appropriate and effective on the continent. Next slide, please. And before I now pass it on to Oluchi, I'll just talk a little bit about the methodology. So we started off with a series of consultations with HCD practitioners across the continent. We had some really amazing conversations with practitioners from organizations like the Aga Khan Foundation, like UNICEF, like Dalberg, like Think Place, to really try to gather people's perspective and experiences in applying HCD on the continent. And the idea was for this to inform the design of the survey questions that we would then use. We then built up a survey and again incorporated these various partners that we had into the design. And just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of those who have contributed to this. I may not be able to remember you all, but that we have an acknowledgement section in the report. So please do go look for that. You'll also be able to see who are some really amazing and awesome practitioners on the continent and which organizations they're from. And so, yeah, once we had our survey designed, we launched it via our Luca platform. And yeah, we had the survey running for about 5 to 6 weeks. And then we went into a pretty intensive synthesis and analysis process, once again, bringing our partners back into it, drafting a report, having our partners review it, and then sharing what you see now. So just wanted to say another big thank you to both the UX team and also our partners in helping us to make this happen. Yeah, I'll now hand it over to Oluchi, who will now share a little bit about where and who our respondents are, where they're from.
Yes. Thank you. So just quickly the demographic data of the responses that we got. Out of the 114 survey responses, 19% of those came from respondents living in Kenya, 18% from Senegal, 8% from Nigeria. To use this opportunity just to acknowledge that we see a greater representation of Eastern and Western Africa within the survey results, as Rajay has mentioned. And we see this greater representation most likely due to our strong networks there. And so one of our main goals for the next State of HCD in Africa study would be to expand our reach and get more representation in Southern and Northern Africa as well. So if you're on this call and you're coming from Southern or Northern Africa and you'd like to collaborate with us in, getting more audience from there, please reach out to us. So next slide. We had a somewhat even split between responses coming from men and women, with a slight majority of responses coming from women. We also saw a large diversity in the job titles. So we had respondents who were teachers, who had roles like program officers, coordinators, advisors, facilitators, etc. And we believe this diversity just goes to show the interdisciplinary nature of the roles associated with human-centered design. If we go on to the next slide, we found that most of our respondents worked within organizations or companies that implement HCD projects within the African continent, as opposed to working independently as freelancers or working as consultants within design agencies. And then in terms of experience level, we defined this by the number of projects that a practitioner had worked on. And we reflect on this definition within the report as well, acknowledging that different people may define experience within the field differently. However, by the definition that we have indicated here, we see that most respondents either identified as entry-level practitioners or as seniors. And then moving on to the next slide, for the HCD practitioners who indicated that they work within organizations, we found that more than half of them work within NGOs. So this kind of highlights the significant role HCD plays in the development world. And then moving on to the next slide, finally, there seems to be a prominent focus on the health sector for HCD projects. And we see that this focus may be driven by funding interests, as well as the sensitive and critical nature of healthcare challenges, which makes HCD a much relevant methodology to be used to potentially address these challenges. So this is just a quick overview of the demographic data that we got from the study. Now I'll pass it back to Liz.
Thank you so much, Oluchi and Rajay, for setting the scene with the background on this important study from more than 100 participants across nearly 30 countries. It really is an important step in understanding this field and the integration of this approach and this framework in different sectors across the continent. So I would really encourage anyone, if you haven't already spent some time with this study, please do. It's absolutely worth taking some time in your day and going through the study in its entirety, or taking time and going through, pulling out the parts that are maybe of most interest to you from across the themes, and reading about them and learning about them. And Sasha has just shared the link in the chat to the full study. So please do go ahead and check this out when you have the chance to. I would highly recommend it. It's fantastic. So for this being a live exchange, we wanted to take two of the big themes and give them some airtime, not just to dive deeply into those and share some reflections from, designers in the field, but also to create the opportunity for discussion and discourse, and really to ask questions and dig deeply and explore together. So we've selected two emerging themes, one being capacity building in HCD and the other enabling a locally driven process within HCD initiatives. And these are themes that are more important now, I think, more than ever, as we continue to see the real value and need to push for ensuring that engaging your program participants and users as experts that needs to be really central, needs to be really put as a priority. And we need to ensure that their role in solutioning and not just defining problems or needs assessments or research, but also in developing solutions and implementing solutions is solidified. So really ensuring that the people in your communities that you're trying to serve are more than just beneficiaries, but they're experts and they're co-designers and they're partners. And so these two themes we wanted to highlight because we found that they're very complementary to help us to dig into these two topics. So I'll pass it now to Munya, who's going to guide us through the first theme on capacity building. And just a reminder to please share any questions that you have in the chat as we go along, because we'll have a few moments throughout this session where we'll stop to do Q&A. And now I will pass it over to Munya.
Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you to Rajay and Oluchi for that overview of the study. And I do concur. It's an amazing study, amazing work that was done. So if you have the opportunity, please do download it and take a look at some of the findings. Which brings us to this concept of capacity building, because it was a major theme within the study. So before I move on, I want to understand from the audience, basically everyone joining us, what does capacity building mean to you? And you can respond through the chat. And remember, capacity building within this question doesn't have to be strictly related to HCD. What does capacity building mean to you? And I'll be reading out some of the responses as they come in. Building skills, gaining knowledge. Thank you. Training, recruiting, upskilling. Thank you. Strengthening skills and transferring knowledge. Thank you for that. I'll wait for about 3 more responses, then we move on. Mentoring in a focused way, developing knowledge, ensuring that those tasked to do a task have the ability to do so, building infrastructure and skills. Thank you so much for your responses, and it's good that we have an understanding of what this is. Now I would like to talk about how capacity building is being done within Africa based on the study results. So we see from this graph before you that there's no linear path to entering into the HCD field. About 40% of the study participants mentioned that they were formally trained in design. But we also see a lot of consultants who stumbled upon the field of design by chance. So it raises the question about what's required to adequately prepare aspiring HCD practitioners for success. So a question to you, how do we intentionally build HCD capacity in Africa? You don't have to respond to it now. We have an activity for that. And speaking about my experience as well of stumbling upon HCD, you could basically count me as one of the participants that mentioned that. I stumbled upon it through a design sprint that was being shared across social media. And if it wasn't for that, would I have known HCD? And how do we ensure that people like me at that time would know HCD by not stumbling upon it? So everything else that we then do within our different projects, how do we ensure that there's capacity being built within the African talent? How do we think about having HCD as a career choice for young people without stumbling upon it? And lastly, how do we position HCD as something that people can transition into once they know about it, which was one of the findings that we got from the study, that some people only knew about it after they interacted with it in their different roles. Then they transitioned into that field of human-centered design. Next slide. So what we then see, because of this nonlinear nature of learning and developing HCD capacity, is that there are a lot of gaps being noticed by fellow HCD practitioners within their own skill sets, but also those that they work with, which is totally okay. And basically, these gaps include things such as translating HCD insights into programming activities, cultural sensitivity to be truly empathetic, research skills, and many more very critical skills that are needed to bridge that gap of HCD capacity within Africa. And what we then see because of this non-linear nature is that you will notice that every HCD practitioner will not have the same area of expertise, which is totally normal, just like any other profession. You have people that are skilled in a specific area of design, as you would have people that are skilled in a specific area of accounting. But how do we ensure that those interested in expanding their skill sets are able to do so with clear steps? And how do we ensure that we build capacity within teams, organizations, countries, and even regions to have an arsenal of skills that fit the problems being addressed through HCD? Essentially, how do we make sure that if there's a problem in Nigeria, we can find Nigerian talent that can solve that problem using human-centered design? So we need a holistic approach to African professional development, which prioritizes not only technical skills, but also skills such as translating insights and solutions into programming activities, cultural sensitivity, and many other elements identified as key areas of improvement. Next slide. What we would then like to see as Think Place, HCD Exchange, and UX is that we would like to see, and hopefully with your help, by the way, capacity within Africa to practice in different sectors, not just health, not just tech, not just business, the capacity to fully use the HCD process, including shaping programming activities and policies within governments and businesses, less reliance on external, which is out of Africa talent, to solve problems in Africa because of the proved capacity that we have within Africa, ability to engage local HCD practitioners in their country of residence to provide contextual engagement. And this will be we'll cover this later on during this webinar, but also more capacity development opportunities for African professionals that are contextualized for the African continent. Basically having literature and case studies, more of those within Africa that will be used to develop the African talent in the respective fields, be it health, tech, or business. But we also want to see HCD being viewed as a career option, just like every other industry. We don't want to see a future where HCD is still something that people stumble upon, but rather something that they make a informed decision that this is the career choice that they would like to take. But lastly, we want to see deliberate investments towards building the African talent. Next slide. So to get us to start the engagement process of this webinar, we would want to answer this question. And as I pass it back to Liz, please remember when you're answering this question, do not think of resource constraints. Think broadly and outside the box of how we can solve this concern of building capacity within Africa. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Munya. Yes. So now that Munya has really set a vision for the future, what it would look like if we were successfully to achieve this really systemic strengthening of skills and expertise in HCD across the entirety of this continent, we want to figure out together how we might achieve this vision of success. So we know, like, what is the benchmark? What is the North Star? How can we actually get there? What would be needed to get there? So we have shared a link in the chat for a Mentimeter, and we would like for you to almost use this as an opportunity for brainstorming and ideation. So tell us the things that immediately come to your head, and then also take a minute and look at what other people are saying and keep giving us ideas and answers. So don't just think about this as like a one and done, but keep adding ideas and keep submitting responses as you keep getting inspired. So we've shared the link in the chat, and I think now we're going to open up the Menti and start seeing the responses come in. So let me open this up and we'll see what folks are saying.
Liz, it might just be me, but I'm seeing the question on how, okay, I think the question's been changed back. When I clicked earlier, there was a different question, but it's all good now. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Hopefully now it's working. I think sometimes Menti likes to wait until you're projecting. It likes to wait till you're projecting the question to actually go there. So we got a little bit ahead of ourselves by sharing the link before sharing the responses. Cool. Okay. So you've all got, I think, a little preview into another Menti that's coming on later. So we'll just see responses coming in. I'll give folks a couple of minutes just to think without me talking in the background of how we might reimagine HCD capacity development to enhance African design talent. What is it that we would need to achieve that vision of success that Munya has shared with us? All right, we've got some really great responses coming in and lots of them. So please keep them coming. We really want to treat this as like an ideation session. So please try to be as exhaustive as you can. And it will lead to a really interesting and in-depth discussion. So let me start reading out a couple of these. Integration of HCD into design education. So ensuring that there's the proper education and curriculum on design. Cultural sensitivity and contextual understanding, absolutely. Identifying the HCD brains that we already have, yes, and really amplifying the talent that's existing here, absolutely. University hackathons and trainings, making HCD more local, open, and equitable by democratizing it, that's really cool. Collaborating with local schools. Yeah, accessible education resources. What capacity building looks like in Africa. Are we doing capacity building differently in ways that can be adopted better? Yeah, lots about incorporating HCD into education, whether it's through training or at universities, short courses. Yeah, in-person trainings, tailored and appropriate toolkits. Yeah. Looking at a lot of universities and schools, I feel like there's definitely something there that we could dig into. There's some heat coming from that side of things, like really building it into the like formal education. That's cool. making it very contextual to the African context, even to a community context or a regional context or a country context. Yeah. Yeah, making sure any guidance or toolkits actually fit the context, for sure. Policy changes to ensure that talent is represented within projects here, absolutely. Building networks. Yep. Wow. This is huge. I don't know if folks are seeing how much I'm having to scroll here. There's got to be like 24 responses that have come through. I'm also just looking in the chat as well. Cultural sensitivity integration. Absolutely. Mentorship programs and coaching. Yep, for sure. Structured mentorship. Yep. This is fantastic. This is really, really fantastic. I'm gonna maybe just leave and see if we can give it another maybe 30 seconds or a minute, because I see that there are responses still coming in. And I don't want to close down ideation when it's happening and limit creativity when it's happening. Yeah. What might something, if you were working at an organization that's doing design, what is something that you could do? Or if you are someone who's interested in getting into design, what is something that you would want? What is something that you would actually engage with? Yeah, language inclusivity, for sure. Promotion. More marketable materials that aren't just focused on NGOs, but are looking at the industry, for sure, because there's a use case for HCD outside of just NGOs, just as there's a use case for HCD outside of just corporate world, and UX outside just the corporate world. Yeah. Local case studies, learning from experience. Amazing. Amazing. So, all right, we've got some comments also coming in through the chat. So first challenge is to make it easier for beginners to adopt the technology. Yeah, we've heard that a lot at the work at the HCD Exchange, that even just coming up against the terminology of design or the terminology in any, industry can be really, really intimidating. And I think there's something about the design terminology that makes it particularly intimidating, because these are such interesting words like prototyping, ideation. I think there's something about the terminology as well that can make it feel a little bit intimidating. Yeah. Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing this experience as well, and your story from your own experience. I think this is actually a really nice opportunity to open up the discussion now and really start hearing from folks in the audience. We've got quite some time that we now have put aside for discussion. So I would love to just open it up, ask if anyone would like to share a little bit more deeply about any of the ideas that you wrote down, or share from your experience as well. Something like Louise just put into the chat. Feel free to go to the chat. Feel free to come off of mute. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll open it up from here. This goes for participants and for speakers as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Liz, for starting the discussion. I think one thing for certain that is coming out a lot is the idea of working with universities to ensure that this skill or expertise is built from the university level. And you can even go below that, high schools and maybe not primary schools, but yeah, high schools definitely. So what we envision is that once we go to the universities, will definitely be able to create interest within the student body. That way, they then pursue active steps of learning HCD from that tender age. That way, when they are ready to go into the field of being a professional, they've already got the skill and the capacity to practice within Africa. The idea of going that low is that, not that low, but going to the university level is that they still, and this is obviously very controversial, but they're still very innovative and they still like to have that creative brain of their that they still have as a young person, which is harder to convince someone that has started working already to transition into the field of HCD because they think they're not good with ideation, they're not good with brainstorming, they're set in stone with the skills that they've managed to acquire within the field of expertise that they're already working with. But the thing is, those people are still very important because what we see within HCD practice is that we need more people that come from different backgrounds that can give us this perspective that we wouldn't have thought of in any other way, but by immersing ourselves in a different industry. For example, my background is in human resources consultancy, but every time I work on a project, that part of my history always comes in to help us identify some of the insights and some of the nuances that we may be missing as strictly HCD professionals. So the idea of immersing ourselves in different industries, but also starting younger, will help us to develop the capacity that we have within within Africa. And I wanted to respond to the question that was asked by Luis. The idea of going into field, then you identify that the medium that we want to use is not actually being used, and that's one of our big method of engaging with that target audience. It's scary and it's also very exciting, and in the way that you need to then accept that this is the pivotal moment for us to know that we need to change the media. It's scary because you might have invested a lot of money into building an application, for example, but when you go into the market and you see people are not even using smartphones, that's a way for you to know we need to stop investing in this and look into what the people are already using. But however, should you have the resources to then onboard people into smartphones, that's still okay. But pivoting and basically making a U-turn during an intervention is something that us as HCD practitioners need to adopt more freely. So instead of forcing a solution to people, we need to adopt to what they're already using and be immersive in their own experience so that we can create solutions that are contextual to them. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Munya. I like this idea of even going younger and trying to reach people before you get those internal narratives of people saying, oh, but I'm not creative. I can't think of ideas because I'm not creative. Oh, I can't try to build something or draw something because I can't draw. You know, it's those young kids who haven't developed those internal narratives about what they can and can't do, or who they are quite yet, or who they're not quite yet. I really, that really resonated so much with me. There's an interesting point that was put into the chat about how if we're looking just at universities, then we're absolutely restricting the opportunities of reaching, or we're limiting, I guess, those opportunities for people from specific backgrounds, those who might be able to afford or access higher education. And so there's some really interesting stuff going on in the chat here about how can we expand HCD to informal sectors, not just limiting to formal settings, starting younger. Certainly it could be one of those things as well. Ooh, someone's sharing resources in the chat. That's awesome. It's a blog. Yes, amazing. Thanks for sharing. I can't wait to dig into that. Keep this going lively in the chat. That's awesome. And I see that Steve Osumba has raised your hand. Please go ahead, Steve. I'd welcome you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Liz. My name is Steve Osumba. I'm a senior product designer with the Ledo Global Health. It's a Norwegian company, but I'm currently based in Dar es Salaam. Just want to add on to the conversation in terms of the university's role. And I don't know if there are any alumni of University of Nairobi. So there was a program in University of Nairobi that really produced, I must say, a good number of HCD workforce into the market, myself being one of them. I was involved in the program and ended up being a trainer. I joined as an employee. It was known as Science and Technology Park. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, which is quite sad. So I joined as a project engineer, and never knew that they were using HCD in their processes. So I joined there, got training. We had professors signed to our lab. So we were running both two labs, Makerspace and Fab Lab. So Makerspace, so we were running projects which were using were in design thinking and behavioral change. So I learned this by doing, and also we ran a series of makeathons and hackathons, which were not your typical makeathon or hackathon. They were actually semester-long hackathons and makeathons, which we recruited people, and they were actually so it involved both lectures, practicals, and actually were giving them a design challenge, which they had to go to the field, do the research, do all the processes, and have the end product there. And something interesting about this kind of events, we never limited them to only university students. They're open to anyone. So we had university students from all, I want to say, from all backgrounds, both engineering, design, teachers, agriculture, and then also we had professions joining, all various professions from lawyers, medical doctors, nurses, all of them were joining the program. And I think my time there, we ran I think like 4 of these. And I must say, when currently even in the market, HCD market in Kenya, it will be very difficult to not find someone who benefited from this program. What am I trying to say? It's really possible. And I've seen the results really work out when you leverage a really good system, because even though it was university-based, the program was structured that, because even we used to orient primary school kids, pupil, even high schools. So it's just a matter of how it was structured, but it being domiciled in the university gave us an advantage, because we had access to high resources, not just in Kenya, but we even partnered with TU Delft, which had a really a very long history with human-centered design. So we benefited from their resources, and we had their lecturers and students coming around, adding more knowledge, which you could then give to other people. So I think for me, it's something that has worked. We just need to make it work again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Yes, it's very cool to hear people speaking from their own experiences, because you know that at least it's worked for someone, hey? And many people, because I'm sure you've got this cohort of peers who would also have benefited from it and likely are working within this set of skills as well. That's really cool. And thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and your story with us. Would anyone else like to share your story? Or I think it's very courageous and brave to share a story, by the way, in front of a group of people. So really want to thank you and acknowledge that, and invite if anyone else wants to share a story or a question, or expand on maybe one of the ideas that you shared in the Menti. Yeah. Some stuff going on in the chat here. Campaign for a design program with enriched modules to be offered in public and private universities. Yeah. Develop the training modules. Train the future African designers. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Would anyone else like to share? You can come off of mute and keep putting your ideas in the chat. I like this point that Natalie has said. It annoys me when people working in UX are super high tech because I feel like they lose perspective of normal people. Sure. What are our own barriers? What are our own biases that we're bringing to our work? Are we eliminating people because of those biases and because of, you know, elite capture as well? I'm seeing a little bit of that sort of coming through, the sense of elite capture in some of these
to
questions.
slightly expand on that, sorry. Yeah, in one of my previous companies, everybody had a smartwatch except for me, and they all made fun of me, and they were like, how can you, I'm a user researcher, and they were like, how can you work in a digital team without a smartwatch? What? I'm a normal person.
Thank you for sharing that anecdote. I saw some laughing emojis in the chat coming through in the reactions. Yeah, thanks, Natalie. And I'm sure you do a wonderful job as a youth researcher in a high-tech job, in a digital job without a smartwatch. And sometimes we don't always need to know how many steps we're doing and what time it is. Yeah, Munya, did you have your hand raised? I'll pass it to
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Natalie, for that. And it is really unfortunate that people get to be exclusive just because they are HCD practitioners. But I think the other thing that we need to be doing is, especially I'm now practicing in East Africa as well, the idea of localizing the language of HCD. So as we get taught, we're taught in English, but when we go to workshops, especially for these high-density areas or rural areas where we're trying to solve a particular problem, we need to be contextualizing workshops. So if we build capacity from those people that just understood this term called human-centered design. So we just need to be careful about that landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Language, terminology, finding those places where we're being exclusionary, whether it's intentional or not, because of course the nature inherently of HCD is quite participatory. How can I identify and work on those unconscious places where we're being exclusionary, whether it's language or where we're finding our participants, where we're finding this next generation of designers? How can we make sure that we're going beyond elite capture, or we're not discouraging or dissuading someone from getting involved because of framing, or not making the work that we're doing feel relevant to people, whether it's people from a certain community or speakers of a certain language or from a certain background? How can we make sure that we're really pushing beyond these barriers and biases that we bring to the field? Yeah.
Maybe if I can just contribute on something, a chat there's a chat which is really interesting. So Shamim is talking about the process is if followed well. You can lead, the outcome can also be HCD champion. I can attest to this. There's a project we worked on this with Shamim herself. So apart from the project itself was on, it was a project for, when I was still at Path Living Labs. I was design lead at Path Living Labs. So we were working on a project which was meant to motivate frontline immunization healthcare workers. And we were focusing on coming with ideas which were low cost, no cost. Solutions don't require a lot of money, so it involves a lot of HCD work. But part of this process was not just to generate ideas. It was also to empower the users, in this case, which were nurses, on what HCD is so that they can apply it on their personal lives and back at their work. So the entire premise was not just designing for them, but with them. So we go through the entire process with the users. So before we begin in particular county, they have to do orientation to HCD. They know what it is, so that every process we go through them. So by the end of the particular sprint or the project, we don't only ensure that we've tackled their needs, but also they have learned an important skill. And most of them always get delighted and they take this back to their facility and have a different way of solving problems. So that's also another avenue of capacity building. When you are doing a project, you can take that opportunity to ensure that your users not only gain from the outcome in terms of a product, a service, but also the knowledge of what HCD is. And that's always, for me, that was the most powerful thing, apart from just the solutions that we came. And thanks, Shamim, for bringing that up. Thanks.
Thank you, Shamim, for that comment, and Steve for sharing your thoughts on that as well. Just out of curiosity, is there anyone here who has become an HCD champion because you are a part of an HCD process? I'm thinking like maybe Munya, like you were part of a design sprint and now you're a design lead. Like, are there other people, you know, who share that, who've become champions or real advocates because you experienced design, maybe like you were in a sprint or a participant somehow? I'm curious. Yeah, I'm seeing, okay, cool. These reactions that's really interesting. I like that people can do reactions on Zoom. Amazing. Well, I'll put it out maybe one more time in case anyone would like to ask a question or share a story or expand on an idea that you either shared in the Menti or that you saw in the Menti that maybe inspired you before shifting to our next theme. And I see there have been some really nice resources shared in the chat. It might be, I think, maybe nice for us to compile some of these resources shared and share them out after the session. Cool. All right. Well, then what I will do is I'm going to bring us back to our presentation here. And yes, all right, we've already done this. I know that we did have a question about just how HCD can help in program design, in using co-creation and in service design and UX testing for new and existing products. I think the person that asked that question sadly has dropped off, but I wonder if maybe one of our speakers would like to just quickly touch on that In case there are people in the audience that have similar questions, just to sort of lay a foundation about how HCD and user testing and things like this can be very beneficial in co-creating programs for program design, and then also the creation and testing of new or existing products. And then we can dive into our next theme. Yes, one of our speakers would like to take that.
Sure. But I do understand I've been talking a lot. But I'll take it briefly, and hopefully I'll ask Wanja to also put on her take. What I've seen, especially it's nicer with new products, but it can be equally exciting for existing products. So with new products or services or experiences, whichever direction you're thinking of, the idea is to understand the core problem that you're trying to solve. Let's say, let me use a health example. Let's say we're trying to reduce the number of STI cases at a university. So that's the core problem that we think is the problem. So it's an essence of using the HCD process to go back to the people to say, this is what we're noticing. We want to have a conversation about your sexual behaviors, accessibility to condoms and any other protection product that you could use during intercourse, etc., and exploring what they believe is the core cause for the STI cases that are increasing on campus. So by having that conversation, you might even reach, we call it refining your problem statement or your core problem based on what you would have found from the users. And through that, you are able to then develop an intervention that is based on what they use, what they like to talk about, and also basically their behavior profiles. Do they go out on weekends? What are they doing after lectures? What are they doing during lectures or when they have gaps between one lecture and to another? You can then think of any sort of interventions that you could use within that process or within that journey as a student on campus. Then with existing products, it's basically doing the same thing, but with something in front of them that you could assure them. So you would essentially say, we have an application, it talks about STIs and HIV. What do you think about it? What should we change? Do you like it? Basically, making sure that you're questioning the product that you have as if it's not your own, but trying to rebuild into something that will be better fitted for the context and the people that you're trying to solve for. Over.
Thanks, Munya. Yeah. I wonder, Wanja, would you like to add anything on this, or any of the other speakers, not to put you only on the spot, Wanja?
Yeah, more than happy just to add. I really like what Munya has said, and I think also just something that came to mind in terms of a build on that. I think looking at how HCD could enrich program design, I think one of the biggest areas I see is also around, helping create guiding principles. So I think, for example, in programs, it's very easy for people to have a cheat sheet. So you go back to like the way you did this project, say 3-4 years ago, or you borrow something and you say, I want to replicate exactly what I saw. So I think one is also being able to embrace the HCD to give you the guiding principles, because I think when you think of, things around, for example, curiosity, learning, iteration, I think those are really core principles which, when embraced in program design, they stand a better chance in terms of really ensuring that the problems being solved are the right problems and the solution being created before people get to invest a lot of resources into a new tech solution or into putting up infrastructure for something. They have prototyped that in the most low-cost way, and that in the end, really, you invest resources in areas that you have actually confirmed that indeed that is where resources should be going to. So that's my only addition to just what Munya said. Thank you. Over.
Thank you too. And now that you have heard a bit of the brilliance that Wanja brings, it's her time to walk us through the next theme on enabling a locally driven process within HCD initiatives. So again, please feel free to share your own questions, comments, anything from your own experience within the chat. We'll go back to Menti in a little bit. And after we have Wanja walking us through some of the highlights and some of her thinking on this topic. So I'll pass it over to you, Wanja. Welcome.
Great. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for all the brilliant ideas that you have shared. I've really enjoyed just that session looking at capacity building, the reflections around what we have seen work, but also even most importantly, what do we want to see in the future? And I also love that we have really gotten into solutions or potential ideas that, we can take and bring those to life. So for the next conversation that I'll be leading, it's really very connected to capacity building, which is enabling a locally driven process within HCD initiatives. And I've broken this session into 3 main themes. So, and yeah, Liz, if you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So the first theme is around building a shared understanding of a locally driven process. And I'll have a question that I'll be posing to all of us here because I would really love to understand from all of us who are on this call, what is our shared understanding of a locally driven process? And then we're going to, another part of it will focus on understanding the barriers, and the State of HCD in Africa report is really rich in terms of unpacking what did these practitioners, these stakeholders who are engaged throughout the research process say are the biggest barriers that HCD is faced in the continent. And then we will then transition to a session where we'll think about imagining what a future looks like, again, in the spirit of really ensuring that we are defining problems, but we're also getting into a part of saying what can be done. So imagining what does that future look like and what are the different roles that we can play. So this is what we'll really be covering. And really, I would love, again, I think as we've done with the previous session, engage as much as possible. Feel free to share your reflections on the chat. Feel free to also, when you get to the interactive session, to really just raise your hand and share your lived experience. Working, whether it's facing any of the barriers that we're talking about, or also being able to champion some of the areas that we will highlight around enabling a locally driven HCD process within HCD initiative. Next slide, please. Great. So here's the question, and I'd love to hear from us through the chat. What does enabling a locally driven process mean to you? So what's your interpretation when you hear the idea of enabling a locally driven process? What does it mean to you? So I think we'll just take 2 or 3 minutes just to sample a couple of the responses that will be coming in through the chat. What does enabling a locally driven process, or what comes to mind when you hear the concept enabling a locally driven process? Great. I see someone says decision-making is not coming from foreign actors. Yeah, a really interesting way of looking at it. Seeing people not just as users, but as partners in design. I really like that. And I think that something was mentioned earlier also around truly co-creating with communities and ensuring that we're designing with them and not for them. I also see someone saying, yeah, personnel are in the country. Closely tied to that is that bringing in outside, not bringing outside experts and championing the local voices. Having not only designers in the solution, but locals, again, in the spirit of really co-creation and ensuring we are designing with and not for. Yeah, I see someone also mentioning the process being led by local actors, and really, again, the local actors being the communities, the individuals, and the networks that are close to the problems that we try solve. And then lastly, I think there's, priorities being defined by communities themselves. So for communities to have an opportunity to set their agenda and not to have someone else setting that from outside. Amazing. So I think these are really good ideas that are coming in. Feel free to keep them flowing. And yeah, we will keep on reflecting on what those are. So one of the interesting findings that was from the State of the HCD in Africa was, really looking at this concept of, is HCD too foreign? And it has, the report did point out that HCD has been in the continent for quite some time now, but there's still some element of it that makes it feel foreign. And I think Liz did allude to some of those earlier around, the terminologies and sometimes a bit of the silo kind of information. Information seems to sit in certain places and it doesn't seem to be as publicly accessible as possible. For instance, most HCD resources are predominantly in English, and this is something that has been pointed out a lot, that they are not easily transferable to other languages, so such as French and Spanish. And in a way, what then happens is that sometimes when they are translated to these languages, they lose the meaning in the HCD way. So this in itself has been a barrier, and it could also speak to, how the Anglophone speaking countries have seen greater adoption for human-centered design. And this has also been seen in the funding cycles, where there has been more funding going to human-centered design in the Anglophone speaking countries as opposed to the non-Anglophone speaking countries. One of the participants from the survey did say that at the moment, they are decomplicating and synthesizing HCD in the capacity sharing activities, which means we might not be doing full design process, but we're doing what is easy, and we boil it down to co-creation and rapid prototyping. I think this is a really powerful example of, because of it still being perceived as, something that is foreign and something that hasn't been as locally embraced as possible, we're seeing then a bit of breaking it apart and picking what makes sense and what works in the context. And I think, of course, the question for each of us here as practitioners is, are there risks in terms of when people get to pick what makes sense and they leave certain parts of the process? And also maybe what opportunities are there in terms of capacity building to ensure that we do not lose the meaning, or we do not derive the full value of human-centered design because we are picking what is easily consumable and maybe leaving what seems complex or not applicable in the context. Next slide, please. Another interesting conversation point as we again talk about enabling locally driven process is we have to reflect on what are the existing structures that have brought us to where we are, and thinking of, are the structures as they are enabling or are they hindering the authentic application of human-centered design? For instance, in a couple of instances, we have had human-centered design being positioned as a silver bullet. And I think this is a risk that for those who have practiced human-centered design in the consulting space, sometimes based on the limitations that are with the process, then there seems to be clash of expectations where it has been positioned as a silver bullet that can tackle all types of complex problems. But then what has not been widely spoken about are what are the right conditions that are required to realize the full potential of human-centered design in tackling complex problems, between a need to show results very early in the process, and how also the traditional project cycles really are a bit, I would say, impatient, or they want results very early. So you might find you're starting in a project and a couple of months in, people want to see, so where are the results coming in? So really that point of tension of the traditional cycles, but the human-centered design, and how in a way this does seem to compromise the process because implementers and designers sometimes are not able to speak to each other because the early results and telling people to trust the process, there's really a huge tension point that comes around there. Again, picking on one of the quotes that one of the participants who participated in the State of HCD in Africa did mention is that it is very complicated within structures to do this. So to do human-centered design within the current structures, it's really complicated. And we all like to pilot stuff, but a few of us are around long enough to really work out on these solutions and make them sustainable. There's a risk of dropping off stuff. I think what's interesting about this reflection from these participants is that it's also just thinking about, how much resources is allocated to human-centered design processes, and how, maybe as a consultant, maybe someone comes in for a period of time, and then the consulting time is over, so they have to transition, and the gaps then that come with, you have to really not stay long enough to be able to practice. And I think one of the interesting evolution, I would say, we have seen in the space is having design teams in-house, so that then they can stay longer in the process, and they can also support local teams a bit better. And now shifting the gears a little bit, I'd like for us to talk a little about the barriers that were identified again around what are the barriers that are preventing adoption of a locally driven process? So a couple of them did come up, and maybe I might just want to spotlight the top three, as you can see from the study results. And we have the first one being around the lack of awareness of HCD process at the local level. And when we say local level, it's not probably just communities. We are also talking about, local governments. It's the local partners, it's the community, the CBOs, the CSOs that are really at the heart of driving change in organizations, and how the lack of awareness then in a way does become a barrier, because there's a lot of convincing that needs to be done for them to embrace it. There's also power dynamics and hierarchies within organizations. And again, oftentimes you'll find that when the decision-making, the team that is doing decision-making is for human-centered design process, there's a very likelihood that then that will translate into, say, more allocation of resources. It will lead to, a more openness to what the process could be. But then when maybe the people who are holding power are against or do not really fully understand the process, then it itself translates to being a challenge in the adoption of human-centered design, and even in local context. And then the third one is around limited resources for capacity building. I think we've really discussed this well in the previous session led by Munya around, the resources that have been availed to build capacity are still really limited. And that is really becoming a big challenge to, one, the understanding, but also the capacity, and ensuring that even the decision makers, as they're trusting that we can have these people who can drive this process, there has been a feeling that maybe the skill sets still need to be refined. And I think these are really interesting barriers when we look at this, because there's a pattern in the sense that there is an intersection or an interconnectedness in the barriers. And in a way, addressing one of the barriers may not necessarily be the only solution required, but rather it would need for us to take like a systems way of thinking, and look at the role of, how does awareness play a role in building buy-in to availing resources, and how does availing resources, for example, lead to strengthening of local capacity, and ultimately ensuring that trust and decision-making power around resource allocation for implementation of human-centered design is given to the people who are closest and have a really good understanding of the problem that is being tackled. Again, for this, I would really be curious to know, are there any other barriers apart from the top three and the ones that we have highlighted on the slide here that you have observed working in this context? What has been your experience working around this? I think I would really, really love to sample a couple of your responses on that. Next slide, please. So as we think about, again, enabling a locally driven process, a really critical question for all of us here and for all the practitioners out there is, are we really ready for a more locally driven process? And it's very clear that there is a big disconnect between decision makers and those applying human-centered design. And this came out as an area that needs relooking for HCD initiatives to be successful. Skills paired with reshaping decision-making power is a critical enabler to accelerating the progress on application of human-centered design, and also that realization of meaningful impact. I would like to again invite all of you in the next interactive session to really just share your reflections around how might we shift the existing structures to enable a locally driven process within human-centered design. So now that we have already shared what are our thoughts on what do we think a locally driven process looks like, we've talked about what are the barriers that we're seeing. It would be nice now for us to really come together and put our thoughts together to say, how might we shift the existing structures to enable a locally driven process? Because I think from the conversation so far, there's really a realization that indeed, if we're really to get the real change, we need to have the local champions in this decision-making table driving this process. I want to hand it over back to Liz. So over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Wanja, for walking us through that in so much detail and adding so much color to it, to what you saw in the report on this topic, on this theme. And now that Wanja has really walked us through some of these big questions and considerations, to turn it back over to everyone here to answer this question that she's mentioned: how might we shift existing structures to enable a more locally driven process within HCD initiatives? And I hope the mentee should be live on the right question. I'm going to shift us over and see if responses are already starting to come in. The link has been shared in the chat, so you can go back into the chat and click on the link. Also, if you're using your phone, or if you'd like to use your phone for the mentee, you can scan that QR code. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on what we might be able to do to drive a more locally driven HCD process and way of working. And we'll really treat this like an ideation session, meaning blue sky thinking. Don't worry so much about resource constraints or feasibility or what might seem possible now. But what is it that you would love to see done if the sky is the limit? Great. We're getting responses coming in. I'm just going to leave it again for a moment and let the responses keep coming in without the distraction of my voice. Right. So some really wonderful ideas coming in. I also wanted to acknowledge one that came in on the chat that I think is really interesting. Creating kind of community practice that enables people to see that local abilities are available. Excuse me, seeing people's capabilities motivates people to utilize local initiatives. Absolutely. And thank you, Sasha, for adding that to the mentee. Yes, absolutely. Those of us in design agencies push back to clients and donors if their expectation or decision-making don't take into account local voices. Absolutely. So really, a term that I heard not so long ago that talks to this is almost, it's upstream influence. So pushing for this upstream influence to ensure that the process, the policy, the requirements, the funding mechanisms, et cetera, are allowing for this and enabling a locally driven process. Absolutely. Training local governments on HCD process and its benefits. Yeah, so more involvement from government. Framing the HCD reframing HCD and replacing it with a term that maybe resonates better with the African context. Is HCD, does it feel too imported? Does it feel too foreign? And maybe the practices need to be reflected or reframed, sorry, to be reflective of terminology and practices that are more familiar, acceptable, etc. Having more local donors instead of foreign ones. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Creating a, oh, we read that one. Evidence-based lobbying to work on the challenges faced in the workplace using HCD and compare the results to if HCD wasn't applied. I love that. Doing like a bit of a control trial. Shifting more funding to local sources, sharing stories about what's worked well and lessons learned. Yeah. Yeah, encouraging native or local companies to share their insights rather than always focusing on foreign companies to do so. Yeah, have the right tools. Always have the right tools. I love that. Yeah, inclusive decision making, shift from centralized design hubs to decentralized models, community-based design hubs that act as centers for innovation. Absolutely. Ones that are grassroots, led by local people and local design agencies. Absolutely. Great. From global metrics to locally relevant indicators to measure the impact of HCD initiatives. Whoever you are, you're my hero. Yes. So we've gone through a handful of these, ones that stood out to me just by reading through. I would love to invite anyone here, if there's something that you would like to expand on, if there's something that you would like to share more deeply on, share from your own personal experiences, ask a question on, spur a discussion on, I would love to open it up now and welcome anyone else's contributions to discussion. I wonder if to get us going, maybe Wanja, if you would like to just reflect on some of the things that you're seeing or build on something that's standing out to you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Liz. And thank you everyone for all the thoughts you've shared. I think I was also clapping in the background because I think some of these are really like at the core of, if we really want to shift to a locally driven process, I think this does highlight what are some of those things. So a couple that did stand out for me. So one is around, I think I loved the pushback if donors, do not take into account the ideas. And I think this is a really critical one in terms of, I think probably some of us who have been in the space for a number of years, we've been a victim of interpreting, donor briefs and trying to, as much as possible, execute as they have envisioned this. And I think really just something that really we're having that realization is that if we really don't amplify our voice and really shape the direction of implementation of projects, we really will continue to see the same things where we fall back to the traditional ways, or we work on things that we know for sure might not work, but because that is what the donor, the funding agreement does speak to. So I really love also just that aspect of just advocacy. So I think platforms such as these are really good places for us, one, to have a united front as we start to talk about, this is our experience working in this context. We know what works. We know what we're still figuring out, and we know what we hope the future could be. So I think really strengthening that advocacy, which ties to, I think someone has said something around being able to share those successful examples of, this is what we've been able to do with human-centered design, because I think sometimes the reason why, maybe someone dictates a lot, this is what you should do, this is how you should do it, it's because they do not have enough evidence that actually your approach is working. So really just strengthening that, I think, has stood out a lot for me. And closely tied to that, I think one of the hot topics in the international development space right now is the topic of localization. And then again, I think just saying that it's because of conversations, it's because of those of us who have really been vulnerable enough to really get into these conversations to say, we think this works, or we think there needs to be shifts in patterns of funding cycles, and that indeed we need to have more, a locally led agenda as opposed to maybe a global north led agenda. So really localization is a hot topic right now. And I think the hope and the wish we have is that it will really get us the real results of having local organizations being at the heart, being at the driving seat. And I think also someone mentioned in a similar conversation around this that if we do not end up getting to a place where we get the seat at the table, maybe we could create a new table. And I think this is that one table that we've created to really be able to see what are some of the ways that we can rally our efforts and really just put them for the good cause of, a methodology we believe in, but one that we also say that they're in that together. And then lastly, I think it's also the measurement. I think I really love what Aman has talked about M&D, because I think that's a really huge tension point. And I think then you will find that there will be more that will be coming from the side that is non-HCD. So really also strengthening our M&D and also being able to show what are these indicators, that the traditional M&D indicators, log frames might not always be very applicable, but hey, here is what you can also see, and this is what the indicators of progress and success will be. So yeah, I really just have loved the ideas that are shared, and I think this is really in the right context of where do we need to inject change if we want to see more locally driven processes a couple of years from now when we have a similar forum. Yes, I'd love to now open it up to anyone else from the team that would like to reflect. Yeah.
Just to say that if this is why Wanja was speaking on this topic. That was brilliantly framed. Thank you so much for adding that just sort of off the cuff in response to everything that you're seeing here. Really insightful response there, Wanja. Thank you so much. I would love to hear thoughts from anyone else, reactions to Wanja's summary, reactions to the ideas that you're seeing. What is it that you would love to, maybe you could do, or you would like to see others doing, or something that you would get involved with if it was available?
Yeah, I can jump in here, but I really love everything you said, Wanja. I honestly don't have much to add because it was so amazing. But I really like this idea of creating locally relevant indicators when measuring the impact of HCD initiatives. And it's actually something we were thinking around with, like, how might we, if you look at the reports, we looked at, how people are currently measure the impact of HCD metrics, and we had a how might we even define these metrics, and thinking of it as at a local level even adds a new dimension to it. And I think it's something we can definitely create some engagements on during this year, maybe some co-creation workshops to even define these metrics. So just curious to hear from the audience if this is some sort of engagement that anyone would be willing to join, because that's something that we definitely are interested in doing, and we're still in the process of, even defining what engagements and how might we questions to explore going forward. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for whoever added that idea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rajay. It would be really interesting and exciting to use the design process to develop a design community, a design space. There are lots of organizations that are convening on these topics, like UX with these live exchanges, HCD Exchange. I know there's a Pan-African design community of practice that's getting up and running. So making sure that these spaces are, active and attended and driven by designers and driven by maybe an agenda that we've all created from our own experiences and expertise and what we hope to see to push us towards this ideal future. Would anyone else like to come in and share some thoughts, stories, reactions, expand
if I may.
ideas? Yeah, Steve, please.
Yeah, so this always a very interesting topic, because the truth is, particularly for the old school people who are used to the normal way of doing things, it's hard to convince them about this new, not so new approach. Of course, it's not. So it's always very hard lifting that, particularly because when you look at most of these projects which are aiming at social change, the biggest client is the government. We can't ignore that. So if they are like, no, whatever you are doing now, this, however, how hard, how smart you might work, at the end of the day, if they don't give it a blue tick, then you are done for it. So I think I like the fact that someone said about engaging the local, both government, national and local government. I think that's something we've done before. And it's not just engaging them. That's where the trick is. How do you do it? So that is where the trick is. How do you ensure that they understand your process and they fall in love with it? I think that is something we really did well, making it fall in love with the process. So we realize most of the time it's not just presentation of what HCD is, but involving these people, let them produce something out of their own hands, inspire them, let them fall in love with this process. And I assure you they'll be advocating for the process. And this something has worked. I think Shamim also is here with PATH. When I was at PATH, we extensively involve them, even had them do stuff, HCD process. And behind the back, they'll just advocate for you. The next time you have a project with the ministry and they're like, yeah, it's an easy, it's easy. So that's something you have to take your time. You have to design, you are a designer, use HCD to ensure that you make these people fall in love with this process. Otherwise, it will be difficult. So have those techniques at your fingertips. The next thing I want to talk about is tools. Tools. I always say that over and over again, because this is also one of the points where most of the critics of design thinking and HCD always beat us that, solutions that come out of human-centered design might just be desirable, but they are not feasible. Sometimes they are not sustainable. At the end of the day, they are just flashes. So because most of the time we don't have the right tools to use, and then we don't have also evidence to show that where you're going to. So always insist on having the right tools. How do you ensure that throughout your process, you don't only cater for how desirable the thing is, but how feasible it will be and how you will sustain it in the long run. As early as your ideation stage, you can have these tools incorporated. So being objective, so we always strive to create tools which are employed mixed method, both qualitative and quantitative, to make sure that as much as people give their feedback, also you have an objective way of also measuring it, and then also is try to incorporate system thinking system tools in evaluating every solution, so that when you are presenting an idea to clients, it looks really robust. And also that also comes with the language. As a human-centered designer, you also need to know who your clients, who you are going to present it to. If you're going to present it to the government, you have to know that the government also looks about the numbers. digits, money. So how are you going to ensure that at the end of the solution, apart from just saying how wonderful this solution will change, but how is the government going to benefit? How are they going to save costs? So you have to look at those angles. So if you are talking about organization, how are they going to save costs? So you have to think about those angles, have the right tools so that when you present, you are finding a solution is something that is very robust. And I think that's the only way, because for right now, they always just think HCD is just some messy people just doing messy stuff and hoping it will work, which is not always the case. That's how they think. But most of the time is how we present ourselves. So just try always to ensure that you present your solution well and know your audience very well. Otherwise, your solution might be well, but you might be missing just a few numbers and like, no, how much are we going to save? This is not worth our time. Yet, it might be something good. So that's when we'll expect more projects to come your way. So I think that's something I always insist on. Thanks.
Thank you too. Absolutely. Just infusing us with your insights. That's really, really, really valuable. One thing I recently, we were conducting a roundtable discussion, and one of the things that came out of this discussion was this idea of treating your stakeholders like you would treat users, and communicating and engaging with your stakeholders with the same intentionality to gain their buy-in as you would with your program participants and your users. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's sort of, I heard a little bit of that in what you were saying as well, Steve. I'll pass it over to Munya, just as our last discussant. And yeah, guys, we have been going for almost 2 hours and there has not been a dull moment. So that is absolutely incredible. Wonderful. I'll pass it over to you, Munya. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll be very brief because you've already touched on it. It's very important to treat your stakeholders as users, be it the program implementers, be it government, or be it the funder or the person driving the intervention or the use of HCD. So immersing them in the process of exploring the solution, but also being part of the ideation and the testing of the prototype or the solution is very important. That way they have context of the entire process as you go through trying to solve the problem that you're trying to solve using human-centered design. One other important thing is to manage power dynamics. You'll find within a room, if you took home, let's say, I'll go to health because doctors, nurses, and patients in a co-creation workshop, it might not be ideal to have difficult conversations within that workshop or within that focus group. So it's very important to first manage power dynamics, but if you can't separate those groups, that you can see there's a clear power dynamic that will be experienced. So I have a conversation with patients alone, have a conversation with nurses alone, have a conversation with doctors alone. That will make sure that you're making sure that when you're building these interventions, you're really overcoming these barriers or these structures that are typically found when we're trying to do interventions. But also the idea of HCD being creative, buzzy thing is really something that we need to fight. And we need to go beyond the idea that HCD is a workshop, which is a question that, a conversation that we had earlier at different discussions. HCD is more than just a workshop. It's more than a co-creation workshop. So we need to ensure that people understand that when they ask for HCD interventions or methodologies, we're not just pitching workshops. And when they say do workshops, we need to fight back and say, yes, we want the business, but the workshop is not the right way to go about it. There are many other processes and tools that we can use within the HCD itinerary that can solve the problem in a very meaningful way for the user, but also for the client. And by doing so, we're able to make sure that we bridge the gap between what's desired by the users, what's feasible for implementation, and what's going to be sustainable for the organization or the partner or the implementer. So we're not just focusing on just the users, but that's where we start from to get the ideas and the concepts that will be meaningful to them and they'll actually use. Then we come back to the organization to say what is feasible for you and what is sustainable for you to run. And it's important to always measure. I shared an article that was developed by one of our colleagues who's a designer, Katrina. So it's not just about doing providing the report with the suggested interventions, but it's also about coming back to see that if the solution is still performing the way that you intended it to be, right? So we need to have this full process that I was talking about earlier, that it's not just about the workshop, it's not just about the ideation, but it's about the full process of measuring the outcomes and making sure that the indicators that you were targeting, you're still able to achieve them and you're still performing the way that it wanted to be. But lastly, HCD is not a one-time thing. You always come back and just reiterate and iterate, not reiterate, iterate to make sure that the solution is contextual to the current settings that it's in. Back in 2020, actually, let me say before COVID, the solution might have been working great, but COVID changed things. So you need to come back and say, what things are we changing because of the landscape that has also changed? So we really need to be thinking about that as well. Over and back to you, Liz.
Thank you so much. I think the fact that I'm sensing that we could keep going with this conversation means that we should keep creating spaces to have these conversations. This is really important. So a huge thank you to the UX team for hosting this live exchange, for bringing us all together, for giving us the opportunity to have this discussion, to have this dialogue, to raise our questions, to share our passion, excitement, our ideas. I think that this really shows that there's a need and a desire to bring ourselves together to move this space forward. So thank you so much to the UX team for this opportunity. Thank you so much also to the speakers today, Wanja and Munya. It's an absolute pleasure to be guided by your expertise, and Rajay and Oluchi for your leadership and guidance and framing of this study and of this live exchange to bring us all together. And lastly, thank you so much to all of the people in the audience who really, really brought it. It is so wonderful to have a discussion, to have a dialogue, to not just be talking at a screen, but to be interacting with people in this virtual environment is so meaningful. It's so powerful. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts, your sharing, your stories. It made this session so, so rich. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to guide you through today's session. It was an absolute pleasure. I feel extremely enriched for having been a part of this and getting the chance to listen to all of you. I'm going to pass it now to Oluchi, who is going to give us our conclusions, our call to action, and really let us know what's coming next. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. Oh, wow, this has been such an amazing and insightful session. I feel like there's so many people to appreciate and thank, just because this State of HCD initiative has really been a community-led initiative. We have really come together and joined our heads together to push this initiative, and we intend to continue doing so. And so I want to use this opportunity to thank our wonderful guest speakers, Wanja and Munya, for sharing such rich insights that have been discussed throughout today. I want to also thank our incredible moderator, Liz, for doing such an amazing job in ensuring that today's session ran smoothly. Also, thank you to the whole HCD Exchange team just for partnering with us right from the inception of this study. We truly appreciate your collaboration. And then I want to give a huge shout out to our other partners, including Proportion, the Aga Khan Foundation, and the Institute of Design and Innovation. We truly appreciate your partnership. Then a big thank you to my colleagues, Rajay, Sasha, Kalama, Marilyn, just for monitoring the chat as the session went through. That also helped for the session to go smoothly. And then finally, a big thank you to you guys, our wonderful audience, just for being here and participating today. This has been such a fun experience. So just rapidly, I wanted to talk about one key conclusion that I believe we could take away from Wanja's and Munya's presentation today is, and also all the insightful discussions we've had so far, is that HCD does have a high potential to drive innovation and act as a force for positive change within the African context. And also the future of HCD within the African context does look promising indeed. However, in order for us to fully optimize this potential that HCD has to drive positive change, we have to continue to join our heads together as a community to address some of the limitations within the field, explore opportunity areas to improve, also starting with the how might we questions that have been outlined throughout the report, and also share knowledge. I would like to use this opportunity to highlight that within the report, we have a link to a Miro board, which has been termed a HCD knowledge repository. So the link to this knowledge repository would be posted in the chat soon. Yes, it has been posted now. So this board is one of the steps that we're taking to democratize HCD knowledge within the African continent. So please feel free to explore the resources that have been included so far on the board, and also feel free to add any other resources you deem relevant as well. It's an open board and open for everyone. As I mentioned, the advancement of the HCD field requires a collective effort, which is why this webinar is just a first of the many ways we plan on engaging with you all in regards to the state of HCD in Africa. We want to have several opportunities to facilitate these kinds of interactions. And so this is why before we end this wonderful session, we would like to have one more mentee question. So just going on to the next slide. So the question is that what themes from the report would you like to explore further? So the link to the mentee has been dropped in the chat, or is about to be dropped in the chat. So please respond. We want to know, what are your top 3 themes you're interested in exploring next? So during this webinar, with Wanja and Munya, we've explored HCD capacity building, as well as enabling a locally driven HCD process. There are many other themes that came up throughout the report and throughout the whole State of HCD study. And so please let us know what themes you would like to explore next. Okay, so seeing the responses coming in, it seems like the future of HCD within the African context is taking the lead. We also have responses including HCD approaches and sector-specific needs, synergizing HCD with other approaches for optimum value. But yeah, the future of HCD within the African context is definitely taking the lead. Yeah, so thank you so much for responding so far. Please feel free to keep on adding your responses with your themes of interest. So, all right, yeah, stay tuned for future opportunities where we'll be exploring these themes, either through live webinars like this, or through articles, or through shared toolkits and frameworks. We're really excited to further explore the field of HCD within the African context with you guys. So moving on to the final slide, my final ask is that I would like all of us here to reflect on ways we could all come together to contribute to addressing some of these how might we questions that have been highlighted throughout the report. So as I mentioned before, and I continue to mention, this requires a collective effort. So please, if you have any ideas, comments, or suggestions on ways to collaborate with us in embarking on this journey of exploring the state of HCD within the African context, please feel free to reach out to us. You could send us an email at hello@ux.design, or you could directly either email myself at oluchi@ux.design or my co-lead Rajay at rajay@ux.design. Or if you prefer, you could reach out to us on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, we're really, really looking forward to hearing your ideas, your suggestions, and we really want to partner with you all in this initiative as well. Yes,